Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, sir. It's with humility I rise to speak and participate in this motion. I know that every member of this chamber, indeed many South Australians, would have reflections to offer that would endorse entirely the speeches given by the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition, the Minister, and indeed those to come in support of this tremendously important motion at this difficult time as we reflect on 1 year tomorrow since the invasion of Ukraine. The historian Dominic Sandbrook wrote in a magazine this week, and he described it simply: the Ukraine war is not complicated. Sometimes good and evil do exist. And in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, sir, we see a belligerent aggressor acting in bad faith with intentionally confected motives, spreading hateful propaganda to its own and throughout the world, breaking international law and international conventions, committing war crimes and pursuing a war of conquest. In Ukraine, we see a liberal democracy with all of the complexity and all of the complications and diversity that liberal democracies around the world, particularly new democracies, face. But ultimately, we see a country whose people value freedom and self-determination, a country that has faced trauma before and demonstrated resilience and recovery from trauma before over hundreds of years, a country whose people have stunned the world, sir, in the last year with their strength of shared purpose, their determination to secure a peaceful future, and the restoration of their land. Ukraine is not Russia. To say that Russian-speaking Ukrainians, such as President Zelensky himself, to name one, consider themselves Russian is as foolish and probably as offensive as to suggest that an English-speaking Irish person considers themselves English. It's very clear, sir, that Ukrainian people, including in the disputed territories, overwhelmingly reject Russian claims on their land. Donetsk is Ukraine. Luhansk is Ukraine. Russia acknowledged Ukraine's sovereignty on a number of occasions after the fall of the Soviet Union, notably in 1994 through the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, when Ukraine, along with Kazakhstan and Belarus, gave away their nuclear arsenal, and in return, Russia committed to refrain from the use of force, refrain from the threat of the use of force, refrain from economic coercion, and to respect those other countries' independence and sovereignty within existing borders. That document was signed by Boris Yeltsin. His successor, Vladimir Putin, has effectively shredded it over the last decade as he seeks to emulate his hero, Peter the Great, in a horrific vanity exercise that has killed tens of thousands of Russians as well as Ukrainians, destroyed towns and cities, and displaced millions. History, as I think the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition both reflected in their different words, history will remember Vladimir Putin as a mad dictator who tried to break the world. And despite Russian propaganda's extraordinary and laughable efforts to paint his Ukrainian counterpart, President Zelensky, as a villain, President Zelensky has shown himself to be an extraordinary leader, somebody who's been a figure of strength in the face of extraordinary adversity, a figure of national unity and international solidarity and stature. He leads the defence of his country, and he has succeeded in communicating effectively and engaging with the world, including here in Australia. And here in Australia, Australia has stood united. February last year, we had Liberal state and federal governments standing side by side and supported by Labor state and federal oppositions, and a year later we have Labor state and federal governments standing side by side and supported by Liberal oppositions in their bipartisan support for Ukraine, and that will continue to be the case. Australia has supported Ukraine with aid and humanitarian assistance, material assistance and weapons. We've provided support for Ukrainians who have come to South Australia, and whether financial support, humanitarian efforts or other direct action, Australia and South Australia have stood as one in support of our Ukrainian community here too. I note the many South Australians who have volunteered their efforts to provide humanitarian assistance either here or overseas, and in particular, many members of the Ukrainian community here in South Australia have done so. And to that community, so many of whom, of course, have known their own loss and their own trauma through grief, through family members, through friends and loved ones, We thank you for your extraordinary efforts in supporting those Ukrainians who have come to South Australia and ensuring that the South Australian community has been engaged in what you have been going through at every turn. I know that here in this chamber and around our state, in making reflections on this anniversary, we also reflect on the many innocent lives who have been lost as a result of this invasion. 1 year ago tomorrow, we hoped for the best, and I think that many of us feared for the worst. 1 year on, we've all been given heart by the strength and resilience of Ukraine, by the solidarity that has been demonstrated by those Western liberal democracies around the world that the Premier spoke of, who have stood firm with Ukraine, who have continued to provide material and military and humanitarian assistance, who have not been swayed, who, as the leader of the opposition noted, have been swayed by the message that if Ukraine falls, then who will be next? Dominic Sandbrook finished his article with a simple statement: good versus evil, right versus wrong. In a complicated world, sometimes it really is that simple. Slava Ukraini.